Grab something to doodle on and doodle with as we get into some super practical how-to tips for communicating at work in a way that makes others want to respond. Join us as we share ideas to set up your meetings for engagement, send emails people actually respond to, effectively using your calendar, and more. Doodle your way to transforming the overwhelm into under control. Welcome everyone to Doodle to Doing. I'm your host, Karen Light, Doodle Empress, aka Artist and Creative Coach at How Doodle. So welcome Matthew and Emily. Hello.
Hi, Karen. It's good to be here. Thanks for having us on your show.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I just want to open it up for you guys to introduce yourselves briefly to everybody. What do you want to say about what you're doing?
My name's Mathew Worthen. I'm co-founder and chief business officer of Dignified Learning. I'm so excited to be here today because communication is at the heart of all of our important work, not just at Dignified, but probably in your world too. And I have a background working in education, but implementing technology in the classroom and supporting the work that happens when teachers show up every day and try and improve the way they connect with students and families. And communication's always been a central part of that. So I'm excited to share a little bit about my experience and some of the best practices that we've gathered along the way.
So nice to be here today. So like Matt, I have a background in education. I'm the co-founder and current president of Dignified Learning, but prior to having this role, I was really immersed in thinking through how we can be the clearest, most concise educators and supporting educators, and have taken that outside of education now and work primarily with businesses and helping them structure that clear communication so that they are being heard and their messages are being received.
All right, so I want to start this episode off with some clear communication by setting some clear intentions. And the spirit of a doodle is a way that I do it here. So I'm going to invite you, Emily and Matthew. Which phrase is jumping out to you when you think about clear communication?
I love don't tolerate boredom.
Feel the flow.
And feel the flow. Okay, Emily, you had one right away. Don't tolerate boredom. Why does that one jump out to you in regards to clear communication?
I just love that because it requires such intentionality not to create a boring interaction, but then also not to participate one, and to really be empowered to make it engaging.
I love that. I love how you put the onus on everybody who shows up, right? It's not just the person leading it, but it's also who's showing up and participating. Yes. Matthew, why did you pick feel the flow?
I love that so much because to me that says it's everybody involved that has to be on the same page to create flow. And if you don't know how to facilitate that or encourage that, then you're probably going to have a lot of frustrating communication.
Okay. So we've got don't tolerate boredom and we got feel the flow that we're going to come into this this next hour with together. And these intentions, I also put them out there because this whole process is not about skill. We're going to be doing a lot of doodling, but you don't need to have any talent. Emily and Matthew are going to jump in with me and demonstrate that, right? Like we're just going to have some fun here. There's no judgment with what we're creating. We're doing it to get the ideas flowing and so that it's not boring. The first thing let's do is we're going to do a warm-up doodle so everybody can get a little bit more comfortable with this process. And the shape we're going to play with today in our warm-up is just like a figure 8 or an infinity sign. So go ahead and draw that infinity sign or that figure 8. And you can kind of play, you can go around it several times. You could draw several of them on your paper. Just getting that shape, getting used to doodling, letting your hand warm up. I chose this shape because it really speaks to, when we're communicating, we might be on one end of something and somebody else or multiple people on the other end, but we have to come together. We have to connect somehow. And that's what that communication is about. And we have to find that flow. There's so many ways, infinite ways we could do that. All right. So hopefully you have played with that figure 8 a little bit. What have you guys got going on over there? Here's what I got going on.
Oh, see, now, come on, Karen.
That was perfect. These are
Yours
all
is
perfect. Look at that. Oh, put them all up again.
yours is beautiful.
It is great. I love the differences between them all already. So already we got just one shape, different ideas, different expressions of that shape coming out. It's perfect. So whatever of those two intentions are jumping out to you, feel the flow or don't tolerate boredom. I want you just to write that on that piece of paper somewhere for yourself today. Okay, so that's your intention today. That's our intention for the rest of this conversation. And let's flow right into our first doodle. So everybody bring to mind right now, a really boring meeting you've been at, or you open up an email at work and it's long and you're not even sure where to enter in or what you're supposed to do with it, or one of those lovely professional development trainings that doesn't really feel relevant or even helpful to you in the moment. You know what I'm talking about, right? You guys have had that experience, Matthew and Emily.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. So everybody bring that to mind. And I just want you to do a 1-minute doodle. So 1 minute on the timer of what that feels like, what that moment feels like, or that time feels like. So let's see what we got. I got this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I got a bunch of those.
All right, who wants to share about theirs first? Emily or Matthew? Which one? Go for it.
Oh, sure. This is me sitting in a professional setting, but it looks like a classroom, right? I mean, some of the most boring training is just somebody up there, blah, 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 with some chart, and everybody in the class is asleep and they're spaced out, right? So we're not encouraging any collaboration or connection with one another.
That was the first thing I always said, because I was a teaching artist for a long time. So I would come into other people's spaces and I was just immediately like changing the desk, like I can't even, this is not going to work. Or when I was leading meetings, it'd be like, oh no, we're moving this around. I totally get that. Just seeing that alone puts a feeling in us, right?
That's right.
How about you, Emily? What do you got?
Yeah, absolutely. I just drew a one-way arrow. I think most of those interactions are one way and kind of designed around the classroom dynamic that Matt drew. I think the interesting part is depending on how old the professional is, that might not have been the norm that they experienced when they were in school. And so it just really brings to call like what kind of dynamics are we setting up in our workplaces, and making sure that we are not disengaging immediately with that setup, just because that's kind of by default what we might have grown up with.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the frustration that we can have as somebody who's leading or communicating in some way, is like, you want to have the interaction, but maybe you've also that's not really been modeled for you. And so it's unclear how to get it, and you're not really sure even what's happening. So I totally get that. As we mentioned, you guys are doing so much in the realms of helping people to create communication that engages folks, and that this is a big reason why you work with educators. So can you speak to that a little bit, that educational component that is such an integral part of your company?
Yeah, I think one of the first things that comes to mind is defining what we mean by engagement. So, engagement really means the emotional or cognitive commitment to a task. It does not mean entertainment. And that I think,
Emotional or cognitive, not entertainment. Love that.
right.
Commitment too. You said commitment to a task. Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful. Yes.
So it's not necessarily that you need to feel compelled to show up and be entertaining, but how can you facilitate a situation where your team is emotionally or cognitively committed to the task at hand? And they're not going to be committed in that one-way classroom dynamic where you're sitting all day and just absorbing, right? But I think the power of asking questions, getting input, um, asking individuals to make connections, all of those things are kind of inherent in the engagement process and are less intimidating when you break them down than maybe saying, how do you facilitate an engaging meeting or an engaging training?
A lot of that comes to mind is setting the stage from the very beginning of the meeting or the very beginning of the written communication or verbal communication. In other words, we're telling the learner or the professional in the process right up front how they can participate. And if they know that's coming, they will be sharp, they will be alert, and hopefully they're taking good notes. And sometimes, Karen, we start with just that. We help structure and organize a conversation to say, here's the guide, here's the best way to take notes today, because we're going to be asking you for some information to come back to us. And so if they know, okay, I have to be engaged cognitively because I need to be tracking, I need to be writing down. And I know I'm going to be asked to produce either throughout the process or at the end of the process. For the most part, people stay with you, right? And so a lot of that is setting the stage up front and then exemplifying that throughout the process.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is like oftentimes there are these assumptions, right? There's assumptions that people are going to take notes right now, or there's assumptions that they're going to be ready to speak when you want them to speak, or share when you want them to share. But if you haven't set them up for that process, then they might just not even have processed it that way in their minds and aren't ready for you. It doesn't even necessarily mean that they don't want to.
I'll give you an easy example on that. We do a lot of tech training and technical training around how to use tech platforms. Most of the time when I am guiding that training, I expect computers to be put away. And that is oftentimes people are surprised because I'll walk into a room and everyone thinks they're all ready, right? Everyone's got their laptops out and everyone's sitting there. But I know they're not actually going to be as engaged in the training because they're going to be distracted by what's going on. Even if it is a training on how to use a specific software system, we're going to get to the part where you need the computer, but I'm going to tell you when that is. Let's put that away. Let's take different notes. Let's be more engaged with the topic at hand. And when we talk about the basics and how to set the stage, Emily and I talk a lot about this in tech training specifically, where we show up and we talk about the rules of the road before we talk about how to drive the car. And so when we get to the how to drive the car piece, sure, let's include more tech. But when we're talking about the rules of the road side, we don't need the tech to be in our face. And so that's a way to consider, how are we showing up as trainers? How are we showing up as good communicators in the workplace? Well, it starts with setting the stage. And some of the most engaged meetings I have been involved in, the person facilitating, they come in the door and they say, laptop's closed, right off the bat. And if you didn't bring scrap paper, if you didn't bring a pen, we're going to provide that, because not everyone's expecting that moment.
Yeah, especially a lot of these days with everything being digital, I do a lot with paper and pen, and people don't show up with that stuff anymore. They're like, wait a second, I just have my phone. So
Yep.
yeah, bringing what people need, not making those assumptions. And, these are things that we're so taught to think about as educators, right? Like this is part of our training, and we show up for kids in this way, for young people in this way, not assuming that they know how to engage without some direction. But suddenly we kind of lose sight of that as adults. And yet we still need that direction. So I think that's a really important thing to think about. And the rules of the road, I really like that. Like, what are the rules of getting on the road? That creates a nice visual. And that just comes back to that idea of like, let me clearly communicate to you what's going on here. And in that clear communication, you can show up. You can show up. I do want to mention something else that Emily said back at the beginning too. Like, it matters how you show up too. And I just think that there's, you were saying, Emily, like, people don't want to be entertainers. They're like, oh, that's not why I'm here, to be an entertainer. But that onus to show up in a way is also something I think that allows you to lead yourself, right? It's like a leading yourself process. And I'm wondering, like, what you guys might think or speak to in terms of that piece.
I think the first thing to really think about is, if you're going to share information, keeping in mind every time you are sharing information with your audience, you're expecting them to learn. So you may not be a teacher, you may not even consider yourself an educator, but you are showing up and you ultimately need to get a behavior change out of that interaction. So a lot of times people get caught up in, oh, well, these are adults, these are professionals, they're getting paid to be here. That's enough of a reason. We have to do this. It's the law, it's compliance, whatever it might be. And all of those things might be true. You might be factually correct, but you're not going to get the result out of it. And so when you step back and when you say, put the computers away, here's your pen and paper, here's why we're here today, most people do want to do well and participate and show up in a way that they're expected to. But you have to create that dynamic where they feel like you're setting something that's attainable for them, right? And when you do that, the first thing you're doing is providing that foundation. And a lot of the times when you are presenting information, you know it so well, you so clearly understand why the other party needs to be aware of it, that you just skip past that and assume that they know. And people get lost in that sea of information. So you have to give them the who, what, when, where, why, and how, that big picture to anchor in before you dive into the specifics.
And we see that play out in really practical, small ways too. Karen, not everything we're talking about today is necessarily related to a super important meeting or facilitating a large group. If you're communicating in a professional setting, even just writing email, that same level of intentionality and introspection to say, what is the purpose? Am I clearly expressing that? What do I need the person or people on the other side of this communication to do with the information? Am I leaving it up to them to infer it? Or am I clearly and concisely stating it and calling it out with a text feature in written communication? And so we can really dig into, how do you effectively approach communication in all of those small ways? And I get kind of excited about this topic because people do get lost and buried in written communication. And I like to ask people, you know, if you open up your mailbox, your email, does the number of unread messages actually have a meaning? Right? And some people laugh and go, absolutely not. And others go, oh, yes, I know precisely where I ended my day yesterday, and I know precisely where I want to end today. And so you can look at that as an indicator of all the communication that is coming and going. And the more intentional we are, and the better we are for our team, the less stress we create for each other. And it's an easy analogy, but I talk about if you were to walk down the hallway of your office, and Karen, if you and I were coworkers, if I'm walking by Karen's office and there are papers piled up on your desk, not doodles, but you know, important
It might be
correspondence
mixed up
papers.
in there.
Doodles might be in there too. And that paperwork is pouring off your desk out into the hallway. And I walk by and I throw one more thing in there. And I get frustrated with you the following day that you didn't read and act on that. Well, that's what is happening, but it's so invisible because it's electronic communication.
Yeah.
And the reason that number that I find it continues to tick up and become this insurmountable number of unread messages is because of how many bad communications are coming in. We don't have good subject lines. The onus is on us to dig through and find action and know what to do with the message. And it's not just the technical buttons on how to manage an email box. It really comes back to starting with yourself. How do you write email, and what are you doing to the team members around you and the people outside of your organization? I don't know that it's too strong of a word to say at times we torture one another with communication.
Yeah.
I mean, people really struggle with this.
Exhausting.
It's an interesting exercise to go through with your team and say, okay, write a correspondence, and then to reflect and say, now write it not from the perspective of what you want to share, but what the other party needs to hear.
That's so cool. I love, you know, just doing that once probably has such an impact, you know, every time you write it. I know you guys are going to share even more tips in a little bit. I want to take us into one more doodle before we get into that next part. So, but this 1 minute doodle, you know, we all have to have our whys. Like, why would I even want to spend time thinking about this? Like, I just need to get through my day. I just need to send my emails out. I just need to show up for my meeting. I just, you know, I don't have much time to think about this. And a big why that comes up for me is what it feels like, that moment when the understanding is reached, the communication clicks. People are responding and engaging in a way that feels helpful to you, to your team, to what you're trying to achieve together. And I want you to do a doodle of what that feels like. What is that, those feelings, those moments, what do those feel like to you? What does it look like or feel like?
When communication's going well?
Yeah, when it clicks.
When it clicks.
When it clicks.
mine because it's probably the least artistic in quality.
You don't care about artistic here.
This is two people sharing an idea. The sun is shining. They're happy with their mood because it's really working. They're feeling that flow.
You know what's cool is if I compare that doodle to your doodle, right? The first doodle that you did. I see faces now. There were no faces, I believe, in the other one.
Yeah.
And there's expression. And it's much bigger. Like each person is bigger. And these are just interesting things to notice when we're looking for visual information, right? Because to me, that says a lot. Like there's a human connection that's being made. You're not just another, stick in the wheel or cog in the wheel or whatever, there's like a real interaction there. So I love that. What came up for you, Elma?
Well, I think I drew a sun, which is funny. We didn't plan that. But I think it feels like synergy. And I think it feels like people leaving an interaction and not only knowing what they own, but being excited to contribute to whatever the collective discussion is or was.
Yes. And it's, we're looking at your two doodles too, even like, the one way is just like an arrow, but the sun has all these different directions coming off of it. So there's like a lot more action there, or a lot more reaching people in different ways. To me, it's speaking to that. I love that. So yeah, mine, at first I was a little frustrated. I was like, oh, I should have done it on another page. But then I think it was kind of cool because, I was thinking of like two people there and like how it expands beyond them. Then I was like, oh, it encompassed, like it could transform the boredom. Like, like it could bring some light and color to that. And suddenly it's like, oh, that's why I'm here. This makes sense to me. It's relevant. I know what to do. I'm not, because I think people show up like we don't, most of the time, most of us, a lot of us are in jobs that we want to do well in. We want to bring ourselves to. We want to feel like we can use our talents and skills and experiences towards. And it's demoralizing when you don't know how to do that, or you can't figure it out, or you're lost in the drama of just trying to communicate all the time. So that just really stands out to me as like, oh, it feels so much like lighter and expansive in that way. So let's talk about that for a second. So when we are trying to communicate, Mathew mentioned email, we've been talking about meetings, we've talked about trainings. I would love it if you guys would share some practical tips for us. I know, Emily, you started digging into that a little bit with that awesome activity of writing it out, what you want to share, and then rewriting that towards what others need to hear, right? What other practical tips do you have for us?
I can stick on the email talking point. Maybe Emily, you want to stick more in the real world. When you sit down to draft an email, it starts with a subject line. And that's a pretty simple thing to say, but when you write an email, the subject line needs to indicate action items and due dates. If you can fit that in there, it should be a useful thing to receive.
That's so good for me to hear because I often hate coming up with subjects. Like I hate them. Like I'm like, oh, what should I title this? And then like I just and send it off because I can't. Like, so you're saying like put a due date in there. Wow.
And an action item
Item and a due date in
or
there.
simply, Karen, if you don't want to recreate it every time, if the email does contain something for the recipient to do, the subject line can simply contain action item and when you'd like it to be completed by. That's a decent subject line in itself. That's better than just coming up with some soft, subject. And then you look at the body of the email itself. Oh my gosh, there's a lot of strategy here, but the one that I see missed, and it's such an easy opportunity to make email better, is to bold key information. if this is a long form email, maybe a lot of that information you need in there, but can we bold when something is occurring, what you as the recipient of the email need to do? Again, bolding that due date. That's really important. And the second one, which is super simple, but I see it missed a lot, use bullets.
Mhm.
Bullet out key concepts. It makes it so much easier to receive. If things are organized, they're bulleted out, and key information, those action items are bolded. It's very, very simple.
I mean, one of the things I notice is that when I do put bullets in there, it makes me say it clear too. Like I take out all the wish wash, you know.
Mm,
Um, it, I I'm somebody who loves creative writing. Like I love to like, you know, growing up, I just any creative writing assignment I could write and I could write, I could write any technical writing assignment or like super researchy kind of thing. I was just like, oh, my brain, it hurts, you know, like to make it concise. So these, and I say that because I think a lot of the people that I work with also are more in the creative zones of things. And these simple little tasks can help to weed out we you know some of the feelings and the beautiful ways of saying things that aren't necessary, or you know repeating yourself 5,000 times because you're afraid somebody's not going to understand it in just a slightly different way. I mean, those are things that I often see come up in writing when you got the creativity a buzzing in your brain. And I have found that too, like taking a few, I've never, the subject line is completely new to me and I'm like loving that right now. And I wonder what I'm going to title my next email to you, Matthew. You have to let me know if it's any good. But yeah, bullets and bolding and just putting some highlights or color in there makes you as the writer get clear about what's important for you to share. It like weeds things out. So thank you. Those are great.
And the reason that works is because most of our brains like to receive information in whole to part form. So when you're writing the subject line or when you're writing bullet points, the reason that's effective is because you're starting with the big picture, not the details.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter what kind of communication you're doing, it's that overarching big picture idea first, followed by here's what you need to be doing.
And that's why we do it so backwards, right? Like we're caught up in the details. We're the one with the information. We have all these details, and maybe we have our big why going on, but we haven't communicated that up front to other people yet.
And I think, Karen, you're really spot on when you say it's really hard to do. And it is. The truth is, if you want to get something out of that communication, you have to invest more time. It's actually more intellectually rigorous to write a short and concise email than it is just to get your thoughts on paper and send it out. Somebody's going to be doing that work. It's either going to be you when you're drafting that communication or the person who's receiving it. And that's where Matt's point of, you know, throwing a Post-it note on a stack of 10,000 papers. Good luck getting a response to that. So be realistic. People have full inboxes and short attention spans. Make it easy for them.
It reminds me of that quote, if I had more time, I'd write you a shorter letter. Like it's that whole concept of simplicity can be more challenging. But I think the thing to, you know, if we are clear up front, if we invest that time up front, what always motivates me to do that is the frustration time it takes off the back end. How many back and forths am I going to have to write, or how many follow-ups am I going to have to do because I wasn't clear and they don't know what to do. They're lost and they're not saying something to me. So they're, because they feel like they should understand it, or you know, these are some of the things that I often see my clients struggle with is I have a lot of college students and they get really overwhelmed by the information given to them. And they're like, I don't know what they want from me. Like, you know, even from professors, I don't know what they want from me. Or they get an email from their workplace and they're like, I don't know what they want from me. And it creates a lot of anxiety And on their end, so speaking to the end of the receiver end, what I see is frozen, like they're frozen with it.
Mm.
And how that might feel to the person sending it is like, oh, they're just not doing their job, or, they're not wanting to engage, or they don't care about this. So I think, yeah, these things can really help to alleviate, to get what you want, right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and summarizing, I think, is a powerful underused tool, right? So when you get that long email, replying back and saying, thank you for this communication. Please confirm that I'm on the same page as you. Here's how I'm going to proceed. Giving that back and making sure that as the receiver, you've taken away the main idea. People actually like that kind of engagement, and it prevents rework and frustration and overwhelm. Just ask the right precise question in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And when I just keep thinking about that too, like it is so helpful when people lead with the why, like this is why, or this is what it's a part of. Let me give you the details. And then that extra part of now putting it together, like, let me integrate that all for you. This is, in summary, what's up. It's like, oh, like it just feels better already just thinking about that in my brain, right? Feels better thinking about that.
That's so true, Karen. And the place that I see this opportunity missed more than anywhere else, at least in electronic communication, is with calendars.
Mm, calendar.
People write calendar events from their own perspective, and then they end up inviting people to an event, and the person on the other side is not getting any value out
Mm.
of how that calendar event is created. And I'm not going to throw any brands under the bus, but we work with some of the largest tech companies in the world, and in other industries as well. And there's such a lack of consideration in calendar management. And I saw an email or a calendar invite come across the other day. It was titled Fun Lunch, which sounds like something I would want to accept, except I need more information than that. I want to know what is actually going on. We're involved, like I said, with a lot of different companies and projects and things, and we are constantly getting one-way communication. Back to Emily's arrow, and it's, if you can imagine receiving what you're creating, you'd probably make it different. And that is one of the things, COVID taught us that virtual meetings are going to be very, very common. And we still lack, I think, that critical thinking step in the process of calling out, is this virtual? Is this in person? Is every attendee actually listed? Is relevant information attached? It's that kind of coalescence, and people miss it. And it's something that drives me crazy, and I know it drives a lot of other people crazy, because you look at your inbox and it's a mess, and you look at your calendar and it's a mess. And I think there's a real cause for burnout, for just working for the weekend, turning this thing off at 5 o'clock, because it's frustrating us, and it's taking so much energy to process through all of these items.
Mhm.
And my emphasis and my ask, when I have an opportunity to talk to a group of people, is to say, we can't control how everybody writes email and how everybody creates calendar events, but we can create norms within our own teams. And if we can just start there, then we can solve, does 20% of your communication or half of your communication come from within the team you work in? Because if we can create a norm there, it's going to make a noticeable impact in your ability to, wake up, shake the mouse, get started with the day, and go, my team is on the same page as me. My inbox is working for me. My calendar is working for me. And it's not this source of stress and overwhelm. And that's what I see continually getting worse. There's really nothing in place that's making it better. Teams are getting bigger with remote work or hybrid work. This is more critical than ever, and it's becoming the source of overwhelm.
It makes me think about like, for a while there, I was taking a lot of swing dance lessons, and I, pretty intensely for a while. And it's always so good, right? As an adult to go back to basics and learn something new, like, and feel like a bit of a fool and mess up all the time. And every time, you get the basics down and then you can move up a level or learn a new move. But what breaks down every time we leveled up? The basics. And my instructor would always say that, back to basics, back to basics, back to basics, just shore up the basics for a minute and now take that basic back into it. And it makes me think about that, because as that's what it feels like, right? In our world, like it's just this increasing frenzy that's happening. And it can sound so silly to some people to have a conversation like this, but like these are the basics that we are making a lot of assumptions about and overlooking often, that could break a vicious cycle and start a new positive cycle for us all. And I'm wondering, like in your experience working with folks, what suddenly, gives them the impetus to slow down enough and be careful enough to start, really tending to these basics and sharing and creating those norms?
I think there is such a universal desire right now to pull back from burnout. And I think there's a will, but not necessarily a way that most people and organizations know how to do that. But if you just start with one or two things, like Matt is saying, can you name your file structures differently in your team so that everybody can find the document they're looking for on the first try? I think so much of it goes back to like expectations. If you're not setting an expectation that other people can attain, then you're always going to have overwhelm and disengagement.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just like what your instructor said, the moment things get harder, well, let's go back and focus on the basics. You have to feel like you have a little victory so that you can keep going.
Little victories. Yes.
And that very much is, the kind of grassroots effort. Getting everybody to buy in is really, really important. And when I put on my chief information officer hat, if I was still representing a public organization, I would say, well, why are we making an investment into a communication tool, which is really all this stuff is? Why are we making an investment into a communication tool if we're not going to coach and facilitate good communication? And so it's protecting your investment. It's exemplifying values that you as an organization have, that you care about all of the people in the organization, that they get to have an experience every day at work to the best of our ability, to the extent in which we can enforce and control. They're going to have a positive experience with the communication tools we're giving them. And I see, private conversations that I have with CEOs that become very emotional, because even, there is no level of organization in which you escape from these problems. And when you do move up the ranks, they become bigger problems. And I have CEOs and CFOs that get very emotional about this. And they say, Matt, I wake up every day and I try and beat that inbox down as best I can. And I go to bed at night not knowing what I missed, I've just done the best job I can. And a lot of times they end up hiring somebody to help manage their inbox because there's so much going on there.
Oh
But
yeah.
if we look again at the data and say, well, 2/3 of your emails as a CEO are coming from within your business.
Mhm.
Like it is your organization that can actually participate in a positive change by adopting meaningful communication strategies.
Mhm.
And it truly can be transformational to instill those basics, right? I mean, I think we have just missed an opportunity, and we are now advocating as a business that opportunity can present itself when you as a leader, or as you as an individual on a team, advocate that, hey, why don't we agree on the basics? Why don't we cover those basics? And it is amazing the transformation mentally that can occur, and the amount of productivity that can increase when we are not ourselves the source of someone else's burnout and frustration, right? And so we model it first, we help support it and facilitate it for others that are struggling, and it will spread because it's such a positive thing to say we want everyone here to have good communication skills. And there's some very basic strategies, and we can still talk about more of those today, but it is an inspirational message when we can get behind that
It
together.
is. It really is.
And
I mean, I was on a leadership team for a while and I was just snowed under from my inbox, snowed under every direction, never caught up, never knew, like that, what you described was so true for me. I never knew what I was quite missing. I was just hoping that all the balls were in the air. I had no idea if I dropped them. I had a habit of working on a Sunday night, which was the worst way to start a week. And then I, had to break the habit because it was killing the rest of my week, but it was scary to break because I just, I got less done that way. But it reminds me of like, the idea of a digital camera. Like we take how many photos? I mean, I was at the park the other day. I'm like, oh my gosh, kids like grow up with their pictures being taken every 5 seconds, like I can't imagine that. Just because it's easy doesn't mean we still need to use it that often, like but our email, yes, it's easy, but do we need to send an email with every thought that comes through our head? Can we coalesce them somewhere for a minute? Think about it. What's really useful? Put it together. Like these thoughtful processes, can really, I think, even in and of itself, just slow you down to breathe and not feel the burnout. So I want to take a second, just for everybody who's listening, because a lot of really great tools and tips have been brought up here. And, I want you to think for a second about, where is it? Like Emily said, like start somewhere, you don't have to implement everything all at once. Then you're just recreating the same problem, right? In a different way for yourself. That's a different monster. But like, is it email? Is it a meeting? Is it your calendar? Like, where is the spot that you want to focus on? Somehow going back to basics, whether you are leading people or you are not in an official role, you can still influence, you can still create new norms. So, where is that point for you? And where might you want to start? Like what ideas start coming up for you? So, write for yourself what area, first of all, on your piece of paper. And I love one of you said, forgetting who now, that idea of imagining yourself in the recipients. You probably both said it multiple ways, but imagine yourself in the recipient's end. All right. Do a doodle of what you would like to receive. Like if you're sending it out, if you're focused on email, for example, how do you want that person to receive that email? You can do a combination of writing or pictures here, whatever comes up for you. I want this to be a really practical thing. I want to give everybody a place to start here. If it's calendar, You know, what do you want people to see when it pops up? That invite pops up, you know? If it's a meeting, what do you envision actually, you know, maybe it's the way people are seated or what they're seeing when they're looking up at you. Start somewhere. What's the place you want to start? Okay. So where do you want to start? The people who lead this, I'm so curious. I'm always curious to see, right? Because just because we are teaching things doesn't mean we're perfect, right? There's always things that we're working to improve. So what came up for you all?
Okay, so I wrote slow down in the middle here. This is something Emily and I have been saying to each other recently. Slow down to speed up. And we have to start by slowing down. This is a basic little dialogue here between these two, but I've got some exclamation points with some squigglies. Like, this is the subject line of an email I'm imagining. And I've got these exclamation points because it's conveying urgency. I have two little stars with arrows in my signature. I'm calling out two pieces of information and signing off. Like, we don't need more than that. Let's keep it slow and let's keep it simple.
I love that. Even like, oh, that gives me like a creative idea too of, I don't know, even some think about this slowly and then the subject line, you know, when you want something to really be thought about, maybe there's a better word for that, or you create your own system, you know, with what you're doing. But like, you know, is this a quick thought, or is this a like you need an hour to consider, like even like how much time maybe this thing is going to take you, so you can like look at your schedule and plan it. Is it a slow thing? Is it a quick thing? I don't know. There's something creative around there that I think would be useful.
So I did something similar. I wrote a little conversation bubble with a phrase. And the first thing I want somebody to be aware of is the expectation. And then the second would be kind of a deep breath saying, I know what to do, and there is time to do it.
I know what to do and there's time to do it. I just feel the stress levels disintegrating with that sentiment. Like it's just, I got this.
I think what we can do all in our spaces is a few things. So just on a personal level, everybody is overwhelmed with email. But I don't think we're really honest with ourselves about how much time managing an inbox takes. And that's different for different roles. But, you know, for me, I need probably 3 solid hours of work to just process through and react to what comes in my inbox. That the onus is on me there. I should plan for that and be aware of that. And I should communicate that with my team. Even if you can't block off those hours every single day, have a dialogue about that. You can't solve a problem if you don't know it's there.
I love that. Just even having that conversation, like everybody is an experiment this week. I want you to track how much time you really need in your email, like, you know, or how much time you are spending. Does that feel like enough or not enough? You know, where are we at as a team? That could be.
And then kind of the second practical thing that I think we can all do with our teams is think about that metaphor. We talk about the metaphor of the digital office space. Think about the 1950 office space, right? If there were a pile of papers on the desk, if the filing cabinet were overflowing, you would have to stop as a team, process through that, organize it. And we don't do that. We don't think about it. But if you just put an hour once a month on the calendar with your team to organize your drive folders, to make sure that you're getting rid of documents you no longer need, right? Just kind of those basic housekeeping elements that you had to do in a physical office space, we should still be doing them. They would bring our brains tremendous stress relief and help us feel like we are more organized, more efficient, like we have what we need.
A quote comes to mind, which I think we've really started to embrace at Dignified Learning, which is to plan the work the plan will work. And if you aren't planning the work first, you're missing that first opportunity, as Emily is saying. And Karen, you had mentioned it. Well, how long will it take to write an email or respond or craft something new? Well, it starts by intentionally holding that time in your day and not allowing someone else to take it from you.
The reason this is so hard is because a lot of these structures were in place and we didn't have to think about them. We couldn't challenge them, right? The most obvious one is the 9 to 5 workday. You get in the office at 9 and you leave at 5, and you couldn't take the filing cabinet home with you. You couldn't take your office phone home with you, right? But it's different. And there's a lot of conversation about boundaries with remote work, but I don't think there's a lot about how to structure it in a way that prevents that overwhelm.
Yeah, I mean, most of the people I work with, I work around executive function issues, and it's these things of everything is so overwhelming and I don't know where to start or how to break, that's why I love coming back to basics. And I love this idea of like a team organization hour, a team, just go through digital files hour. Like a lot of people that I also work with are, not necessarily, they have ADHD or they think differently. And so having these processes of accountability built in or mirroring built in, all your team's doing it right now, can be a really, just more inviting way for somebody who's overwhelmed, because then, well, how are you doing that? Oh, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll come over here and do it that way, and now you're talking about it as well. You're actually having those conversations as a team. This is how to organize it. I worked at one place it was a corporate school for a long time, and they, one of the things that was really a struggle was every school that they opened, they didn't have a lot of the processes like written somewhere as like a guidebook kind of thing. So we're always reinventing the wheel. But then I'd go to a conference with 10 other people in my role and be like, oh, that's how you're doing that thing. It was so helpful. Like it was so helpful because we all are good and strong in different ways. So, these I think are just morsels for how to de-stress, avoid burnout, feel like you can manage your day. And then also think about like how that starts creating that cycle of like, if that's how you feel, that changes the way you communicate. So back to full circle, right? Like that changes how you communicate. If you're communicating from a place of calm and control, then you're not just like hurriedly sending off emails that don't make sense to people, or just like trying to zip through a meeting and people are like, what's going on, Well, let's wrap up with a longer doodle here. One little bit of a more takeaway sort of doodle experience. So I want you all to close your eyes for a second. Just get comfortable in your seat and let your hands relax in your lap. You don't need to hold anything. Take some breaths, settle into your body a little bit. Maybe shake anything out that feels tight. Even this can be a wonderful practice to do before you respond to an email, send an email off, start writing an email, before you start a meeting, before you call for a meeting. one easy minute of breathing. So you can be a little clearer with yourself and be a little clearer with everyone else. So Dignified Learning works with educators because so much of what we talked about today is a teaching process. I want to teach you how to engage with me. I want to teach you what I need from you. I want to teach you how to be a part of this. I want to teach you what the big whys are. And I want to engage you on an emotional and cognitive level. And within each of us is an educator. Within each of us, you don't have to have a certificate for it. It's a part of us who wants to help others learn. And I just want you to imagine that part of yourself for a second. Bring to mind what your teacher self might look like. And when you feel ready, blink your eyes open and do a doodle inspired by what you saw. It doesn't have to be exactly what you saw, but just inspired by your teacher itself. let's wrap it up with these inspiring doodles. I can't wait to see what your teacher selves look like.
Emily, I want you to start this one.
So I drew two things that came to mind from our conversation today. So not an infinity sign, but the continuous loop of improvement. And I think you have to be really intentional if you want that kind of mindset from your team. You have to be intentional, and they have to have the energy and the reflection to do that, to keep going. And then the other piece I drew is an evergreen tree. I think evergreens symbolize quite a bit, and sometimes you need to zoom out and see the forest, not the individual trees. So that's what came to mind for me.
I love those two symbols together too, because the evergreen tree, like, it's evergreen, right? It's always green. And it's sort of a paradox. It's like finding the foundations, the basics kind of are that evergreen that's very solid and sturdy and steady, while all this stuff is changing over here. Like, while they're living, breathing humans going through all kinds of things. And that I love that juxtaposition of those two things. It's beautiful. Thank you, Emily.
I drew two people, both saying yes, but they're holding 100-pound weight. And I think it's important that we know how much weight somebody else can carry and how much you as a teacher should be giving them. And I also wrote together underneath, because it does take both the teacher and the student to be on the same page.
Yeah. And if you look at your doodle too, one slightly got a little bit more weight than the other, which I think is like a really important thing to have your finger on the pulse of, right? Like, when do I need to give a little more? When do I say, okay, that's enough for me right now. I can take this much and you got that much. But I love that carrying the weight and being cognizant of the weight that everybody is carrying, and what everybody agreed to carry or not. So that's awesome. I have a little teachery doodle here. The first thing that showed up for me was just, I think at the heart for me is always that people are in my heart, right? Like, I care, like the caring aspect of being a teacher is like holding everybody in your heart that's on your team or that's in your classroom or whatever, holding those folks in your heart. And I thought about like reaching out the hand for help. Of course I have a paintbrush, but that's because, like, I think we need to be really empowered to create the experiences that we want to have. Like, everything you guys are speaking to is like, how do I create what I want to receive almost, how do I set this up so that I could create the experience and the team that I want? And of course, having really good ideas, but also like being really open to the questions, being really curious. And like, I put them right by, I should have made them like little question mark earrings. That would have been cool. But big ears to listen with. And I started when we were running out of time, but I was thinking about that road, creating that road that you were talking about, like going on that journey together. And yeah, so these are all really beautiful iterations of what it means to be an educator, no matter what your role is, to show up as a teacher, so that you can be empowered to have the communication experience that you want. So you can feel what we wanted to feel in those second doodles that we did, right? That like click of things expanding and everybody's engaged and involved. So I really appreciate this conversation, Mathew and Emily. I think we hit on some really tough things that we experienced, but offered up some really beautiful, practical places for us to start. So thank you so much for that.
It's been a real joy, Karen. Thanks for having us on today.
Oh,
Thank you, Karen.
You're so welcome. And, I highly recommend that you reach out to Mathew and Emily. I will put all their information in the show notes so that you can reach out to them. They're really great in a lot of ways. They'll help you assess your current content and your current training information for educational best practices. And they'll create actionable content and active learning experiences that you can bring to your workplace, your team, your community, whatever it is that you want to share and communicate clearly with. So all of that will be included below. Thank you everyone for coming to this episode of Doodle to Doing. And until next time, I hope that you keep creating, keep sparking those new ideas so that you can live a more fulfilling and rich life.